Am I a bro gamer? No, I'm not a bro gamer. Who gets to be awesome in games? I'm not asking you the question, that's literally the name of the title of the video. Who gets to be awesome in games? This is another Game Maker's Toolkit video, and I think it's gonna be about, like, who sucks at games. It's gonna be about me. I'm not sure what it's about, but I watched a Game Maker's Toolkit a couple weeks ago, or at least posted a video for it a couple weeks ago, and at the end he pitched this one as like making games for different skill levels, I think is what this is about. And since I'm a relatively low-skilled gamer, I'm very interested to watch this. Before we get into the video, special shout out and thank you to my channel members. I really appreciate your support. If you would like to make sure I read your comment, please become a channel member. I do try and read as many comments as possible, but I do make special priority for channel members. I search for those comments and try to answer all of them. Also, if you did not already know, I am a self-published author. These are my books. Magic required and dominion required follow the story of a Celtic demigod trying to seek a redemption he is not sure he deserves. Blood, Kin, and Curses follows a newly turned vampire discovering a world she never knew existed while trying to avoid an ancient curse. They are all available as audiobooks, ebooks, and paperbacks. Thank you so much if you have read them. Thank you even more if you have reviewed them. And if you're just here to watch this video about me, apparently this is about me, let's get into it. Spider-Man, what are you doing here?
Many games come with the promise of letting the player live out some kind of awesome, aspirational fantasy. Maybe that's to become a comic book superhero. Perhaps it's the opportunity to wield a lightsaber, or become the member of a secretive assassin's guild, to be a rock god, a samurai, a rally car driver, or a no-nonsense yakuza. And from my experience of playing this sort of game, it feels like there's two distinctly different ways of delivering this fantasy. The first way is to simply give the fantasy to the player, easily and immediately, which is something we see in a number of recent superhero games. In the Batman Arkham games, the free-flow combat system makes it effortless to beat up baddies. And in Spider-Man, you don't need a lengthy tutorial to swing around the city with ease and grace.
I need a lengthy
tutorial. This is usually achieved by providing the sensation of being powerful, which happens through simple inputs that get translated into big, flashy animations, cinematic set pieces with pop-up
mechanics,
lenient systems that subtly fix your mistakes, magnetic snapping towards enemies, big, obvious indicators that tell you when to counter, dopey AI that waits patiently to attack, and so on.
I would love that. I'd love some
really
dopey
hard
AI,
to make you
not like the
feel
mushrooms.
awesome by translating your simple intentions into impressive feats on screen. Troy Skinner, producer at Batman publisher WB Games, explains it like
I might actually
people come
dislike
in and spam
that.
the punch in the face button. A lot of games you get punished for that. That makes you look bad. You fail. In this game, you spam the punch in the face button and you look awesome. You are in fact Batman, effectively punching people in the face.
Okay, I might like it.
Is to make the player earn the fantasy through skill and mastery, which is the approach of this year's
I like
Doom
the idea
Eternal.
of that too.
That game has a very stiff learning curve, with all sorts of mechanics and systems to figure out, including resource management, enemy weak points, weapon switching, lightning-fast movement, the flame belt,
my god,
the chainsaw,
weapon
the
switching.
blood punch, and more. And until you master all of them, you're going to fail, and you certainly won't feel like the badass demon slayer in the game's marketing. Which means that the opportunity to live out the power fantasy is withheld.
I just realized what my
until
face
you've
must have
proven
looked
that you
like just
have
then.
real skill and mastery
But it's
over
gross.
a complex set of mechanics. Hugo Martin is the creative director on Doom Eternal and explains it like so.
Hey man, I'm dying to these characters because I'm not, doing certain things. I don't feel strong. It's like, yeah, but you're gonna feel strong when you master how to beat them.
So we can give...
I actually saw this video today that got me friggin' fired up. This was the audio for it. I have no idea who this is.
Imagine if you got what you want every time. No struggle, no hard work, no challenges, no hard work required. Some of you are saying that will be great. You would be weak. And then when something hard comes up in your life, you wouldn't know how to handle it. Because you have never gone through anything that strengthens you. You cannot grow without struggle. You cannot develop strength without resistance. without challenging yourself, without struggle. Pain is your friend. Maybe not in the moment, but for the evolution of your soul, for the long-term benefit of you as a stronger human being, pain is your friend.
So like going back to the other video, I feel like the idea of the challenge is really appealing to me, even though I'm gonna be fucking furious until I succeed.
The fantasy to the player, or we can make them earn it. But why would a developer choose one over the other? Well, Hugo Martin puts it very succinctly when he says,
We want to give you something to master, because the power fantasy that is earned is far more satisfying than the one that is just handed to you.
by making the player actually overcome
Facts.
challenge, failure, and frustration, the end result will be
Furious.
way more rewarding. He compares the experience of mastering Doom Eternal to that of climbing a mountain. It's much more satisfying, he says, to climb it yourself than to simply take an elevator to the top. It's a fair point, and many of these superhero games do end up feeling shallow and patronizing because they give the fantasy away too easily. But when designers tie the attainment of a power
I'd like
fantasy
a happy
to a
medium,
certain
please.
level of skill, they ultimately end up having to ask who gets to live out the fantasy and who gets left behind. As Troy
Right.
explains,
Because we are expert gamers, we say that mastery should come from overcoming challenge. You earn it. But remember, everyone paid $60, and the majority of them aren't going to push through those barriers to get to the mastery. And
I want a
mastery
little bit of, well, I guess
is
that's
tied to
like the
motivation.
skill
So
levels,
if they're not
right?
masterful, they're demotivated, they walk away.
he argues that there are plenty of players who simply aren't willing to suffer through failure and frustration in order to experience the game's core fantasy.
Oh, I'll suffer.
For example, Troy points to the bro gamer, casual players who have a very low threshold for suffering and want to feel competent immediately. And because they make up
bro
60% of the console market, you ignore them.
Oh my god,
at
really?
cost. More
Am I a pro
importantly,
gamer?
however,
No, I'm not a
there
pro
are
gamer.
players who simply aren't able to reach that level. In the book
That's
Lead
me!
the Games, behavioral scientist Scott Rigby talks about control mastery, which is the time and energy needed to learn a game's inputs and be able to turn intention into action. He compares this to paying for admission to get into a theme park. Both are necessary steps in order to access the actual fun inside. But, Scott
Right.
says, when people are discouraged
actual
by a
fun
game's controls,
inside.
they don't have the chance to feel competent at gameplay because they can't even
Mass
get
Effect!
to the real game. For them, the price of admission to the fun of games is so high, they often stay outside the turnstile. And that's not even
Right.
mentioning those with disabilities who may be physically unable to reach that level of skill. Shouldn't they get to experience the power fantasy too?
Yes,
Ultimately,
they
then,
should.
we end up
We
with
should.
a conundrum. If we make the power fantasy
All
easily
of us,
attainable,
everyone
the
should.
game is accessible to all, but can end up feeling shallow to more seasoned players. And if we force the player to earn the fantasy, the experience might be significantly more satisfying, but
Are
we lock
levels,
out a
difficulty
considerable
levels like
number
a
of
new
people.
thing? Like, I don't really
By
understand.
making
Doesn't it
one
just
type of
mean
player feel
difficulty
awesome,
levels?
we lose the other. But
Or I
maybe
guess even on
it doesn't
easy, I
have
still
to
died
be
a lot in The
choice.
Last of Us.
And so, I'm going to explore a number of ways that games can make both types of player feel awesome. The first solution is to provide options, but not the type you might be thinking about, because yes, difficulty options will allow players to tune the game to their ability level, but they rarely fix the actual issue, the inherent complexity of the game. Making Doom Eternal easier will let you make a few more mistakes, but it doesn't reduce the number of buttons you need to remember. And making Spider-Man harder doesn't actually change the web swinging at all. So more important are gameplay and accessibility options. And for a strong example, take Forza Horizon 4. Here, you can enable things like assisted brakes and steering, automated gear shifting, and a racing line. With these options turned on, the game helps players reach the fantasy of being a racing driver by reducing the need for precision, limiting the number of things you need to juggle, and providing lots of information. With these options, you can essentially switch the game from being a rather hardcore simulation racer to a fun and casual arcade romp. And best of all, this is all
love an arcade
independent
romp.
from the difficulty level
Except
of your
episode
rival
7 of The
races.
Last of Us.
So
That
you
arcade
can
romp
reduce the
was
complexity of
stupid.
controlling the car, but without also dumbing down the competition. Other examples of gameplay options include the automatic combo mode in Devil May Cry, the way Jedi Fallen Order makes parry timing windows bigger on easy mode, and how some of the Arkham games let you turn off those counter indicators so you have to pay attention
I
to
want
the enemy
hints.
animations. A second solution is to reward mastery, but not actually require it. For this one, let's look at Bayonetta. This is a game where you almost immediately feel empowered and awesome, thanks to great animation, absurd finishing moves, a very forgiving dodge, and a reasonably low level of challenge. You can basically just mash the controller against your face, and Bayonetta will pull off a huge variety of awesome looking attacks. It's easy to feel fluid, cool, and competent in this game. But there's so much hidden mastery in this game for those who are willing to put in the work. Things like the dodge offset system and the huge number of possible moves means that those who want to get combo mad can express their skill and mastery. That ends up being the real power fantasy, which is indeed more satisfying because it's earned. If we think about this by borrowing terms from esports, there's skill floor, which describes the baseline level of skill needed to be effective with that character.
I'm below the skill floor,
which describes the highest level of skill you can potentially express. If Spider-Man has a low skill floor but a low skill ceiling, and Doom Eternal has a high skill ceiling but a high skill floor to match, something like Bayonetta strikes a better balance by having a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling. Solution 3 is to layer on complexity over time. In a lot of Metroidvanias, such as the Ori games, you start the game with a very simple set of controls. You can really just focus on movement and jumping, so players who are unfamiliar with platformers only need to wrestle with the absolute basics at this point. As you play on, the game gives you upgrades like additional jumps, new attacks, more complex moves, and so on. By the end of the game, Ori has become a complex game with a huge moveset, but without overwhelming anyone in the process. By stretching the learning curve out to encompass pretty much the entire game, players can gradually get used to more and more complex gameplay. We do see some of this in Doom Eternal, with weapons and enemy types being introduced throughout the campaign. And in Spider-Man, where the skill tree lets you add new mechanics that let you swing faster, but also increase the complexity of the controls.
That is so overwhelming to me.
Solution 4 is to simply prime players for failure and learning through the narrative and marketing. One of the issues with Doom Eternal is that the game suggests that you are the most powerful, demon-slaying badass in the universe. And then you're not. I mean, you just ripped your way through hell in the previous game, and now you're falling at the feet of the game's most basic demons? Ultimately, when games promise to let you play as Batman or Spider-Man, or the Dragon of Dojima, or the God of War, it's priming us to be powerful and skillful. And so it does make sense that we immediately get to feel awesome. Anything else would just be discordant. And so if a game wants to make us earn the fantasy, it needs to explain that up front. A good example of this is Skate, a skateboard simulation game with a significant learning curve just to do a kickflip. But it doesn't suggest that you'll immediately start playing as a pro skater. Instead, you're just a lowly amateur trying to get their photo on the 37th page of a magazine. The game's narrative, which is about slowly becoming more successful as a skater, neatly mirrors the game's.
Do you think the amount of time people played this game, they could have become good skateboarders? And why do we think they did this instead? Please discuss.
Challenging learning curve. And finally, solution 5 is to provide multiple ways to win. I've been playing a lot of Hades lately, and in each run of this mythological roguelite, you pick a weapon, perhaps a sword or maybe a bow and arrow. Some of these weapons are far easier to use than others. The shield, for example, lets you absorb enemy attacks and play in a very defensive and reactionary manner, whereas the fists force you to get up close and personal with your enemies, which puts you at a significant risk. By having different ways to succeed, players can gravitate towards the weapon, the character, or the build that works for them. Hades also lets you unlock additional power, health, and help, so it's possible to succeed not by getting better, but by simply playing the game for a long time. That's not my personal preference for how roguelikes should work, but I can see the advantage in giving players a different way to succeed, through time and effort, rather than skill and mastery. Most of these solutions are about the same exact thing, letting players find their own way to feel powerful. That might mean using accessibility options and tuning down the difficulty, or it might mean ramping the game up to hard, playing with the most challenging character, and exploring the game's most complex rules. Both of those
I was
might
really
be
resistant to changing a lot of the settings.
Completely different people. And
to help
something
me with
else
The
that
Last
a lot of
Us.
these solutions have in common is that they encourage players to always be pushing themselves to be better, to be moving towards more
Right.
challenging and complex gameplay. In Forza, using those assist options reduces the amount of XP you gain, so you're encouraged to eventually turn them off as you get better at the game. In
Right.
Bayonetta, scrappy play leads to rubbish trophies.
And I just kind of felt like changing those settings right away was like giving up right away instead of trying to learn the hard way and getting better faster. It felt like it was getting better slower, or like being an even bigger loser than I already am. I'm already such a big loser.
So you're motivated to be more thoughtful with your actions. In Hades, there's rewards for trying out weapons you haven't used in a while, and in Ori, the game just naturally gets more complex the further you go. Because the power fantasy, it turns out, is not one specific point on the learning curve. It's something more dynamic that can move and grow as you do. You might feel the power fantasy immediately, and then feel it even more strongly as you challenge yourself to do better, to explore more of the game's systems, and to increase the challenge of the game. So ultimately, if the question is who gets to be powerful, my answer would be everyone. Not just those who are skillful, and not just those who want to feel immediate
Cool,
empowerment.
I get it,
The
I'm
game
into
should
it.
use design and systems to ensure that at every skill level, the player feels powerful and masterful, but always with room to grow and improve.
Okay.
Hey, don't click away just yet.
Okay.
I know YouTube end screens are boring, I've seen the stats, so I'm gonna make them more interesting by using this time to recommend a different game at the end of each video.
Oh, okay.
These will be recently released indie games and entirely based on my own
indie
preferences,
games.
so it's definitely not an ad spot. Are you ready?
Yes.
Because I only get 20 seconds to do this.
I'm
Let's
ready.
go. Disc Room is a juicy arcade romp about dodging a bullet hell spread of deadly saw blades.
Sounds horrible for
The
me.
master
No,
stroke
thank you.
is the way it entices you to keep playing with bite-sized goals and challenges, surprising abilities, and best of all, Fez-like puzzles
You're just
and
running
mysteries.
around?
It's out now on
No.
Steam and Switch.
Drive me bananas. I'm too stupid for that. Oh, that's it? You're only giving me one. Oh, I guess on the next one you'll give me another. I get it. Okay, I'm into that. That was a very interesting video and I liked it. And if you have any recommendations for me, please leave it in the comment section. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. Again, thank you to my channel members. I hope you guys are all, channel members and everybody else, happy and healthy, taking care of yourselves and each other, carrying your own bags, staying hydrated. Life is always easier when you are hydrated. And as always, until next time, may the force be with you. Live long and prosper. And I'll be back.